She was a marathon runner, 63 years old, still clocking 5 miles before sunrise, drinking what she called her guilt-free energy boost every single morning for the past decade. 0 calories, 0 sugar, maximum performance. Until the day she couldn't remember her daughter's name. Not for a few seconds, for 3 full minutes. The neurologist showed her family the brain scans, and what they saw made her husband weep. Her hippocampus, the memory center of her brain, had physically shrunk. It looked like she'd aged 20 years in the last 5. The doctor asked one question: "What do you drink first thing in the morning?" That's when everything clicked. The very thing she thought was protecting her health was the exact substance erasing her mind, one sip at a time. If you start your day with a sweetened beverage, whether it's labeled diet, 0 sugar, natural, or energy boosting, what I'm about to share could be the most important 15 minutes of your life. Because according to a 20-year study tracking over 4,000 people, published in the Framingham Heart Study archives, individuals who consumed just 1 diet drink per day were 3 times more likely to develop stroke or dementia compared to those who avoided them entirely. 3 times. Not 30%. 300% increased risk. And the mechanism behind this isn't some vague correlation. It's a biological assault happening inside your skull right now, and it has a name that will make you rethink everything you've been told about healthy morning routines. The question isn't whether that morning drink is hurting you. The question is, how much damage has already been done, and can you reverse it before it's too late? Let me take you inside the brain of someone who drinks a sweetened beverage every morning, and I'll show you exactly what happens in the 60 minutes after that first sip. Your brain weighs about 3 pounds, but it consumes 20% of your body's total energy. It runs almost exclusively on glucose. So when you flood your system with liquid sugar or artificial sweeteners first thing in the morning, you'd think you're giving your brain premium fuel, right? Wrong. What actually happens is called the calcium paradox of the brain, except here it's the glucose paradox. Dr. Suzanne de la Monte from Brown University spent 15 years researching this phenomenon, and what she discovered changed neurology forever. She coined the term type 3 diabetes to describe what happens when brain cells become resistant to insulin. Here's how it works. When you drink a high-sugar beverage on an empty stomach, your blood sugar doesn't rise gradually like it does with whole foods. It spikes. Within 15 minutes, your pancreas dumps a massive load of insulin into your bloodstream to deal with the sugar tsunami. But here's the critical part most people miss. Your brain has its own insulin receptors. These receptors are supposed to help neurons absorb glucose and convert it into the energy needed for memory formation, learning, and cognitive processing. But when you create these violent sugar spikes every single morning, year after year, those insulin receptors start to malfunction. They become resistant. It's the exact same process that happens in type 2 diabetes, except this time it's happening in your hippocampus, the part of your brain that converts short-term memories into long-term storage. A study published in the journal Neurology tracked individuals with elevated blood sugar levels and found something terrifying. Their hippocampi were measurably smaller than people with normal glucose metabolism. This isn't just correlation. The mechanism is clear. When brain cells can't process glucose efficiently, they start to starve. And when neurons starve, they atrophy, they shrink, they die. Dr. Sanjay Gupta, the neurosurgeon and CNN's chief medical correspondent, wrote in his book Keep Sharp that added sugars are the #1 enemy of brain longevity, creating what he calls brain fog and accelerating the formation of amyloid plaques, the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. But the sugar spike isn't even the worst part. What happens next is where the real damage occurs. After that insulin surge, your blood sugar crashes hard. And when your brain suddenly loses its primary fuel source, it doesn't just slow down, it panics. Your neurons start releasing glutamate, an excitatory neurotransmitter. In normal amounts, glutamate is essential for learning, but in excessive amounts, triggered by these glucose roller coasters, glutamate becomes neurotoxic. It overexcites neurons to the point of damage and death, a process called excitotoxicity. This is why you feel mentally foggy, irritable, and unable to focus 2 hours after your morning drink. Your brain isn't just tired. It's literally recovering from a chemical injury, and this cycle, repeated every single morning for years, creates a state of chronic insulin resistance in the brain. The Johns Hopkins Medical School conducted a 10-year longitudinal study showing that individuals with poor glucose control had accelerated cognitive decline, losing memory function at rates 30% faster than those with stable blood sugar levels. The terrifying part? Most people don't realize this is happening because the damage accumulates silently over decades, not days. Now, if you thought the sugar was the only problem, you need to hear about the hidden accomplices that make this crisis exponentially worse. Let's talk about what's actually inside that 0-calorie morning drink. The most common artificial sweetener is aspartame, and it's in everything from diet sodas to healthy protein shakes to sugar-free energy drinks. Aspartame is a chemical compound that, when digested, breaks down into 3 substances: aspartic acid, phenylalanine, and methanol. Here's the nightmare. These compounds can cross the blood-brain barrier. That protective membrane that's supposed to keep toxins out of your brain? Aspartame walks right through it. Once inside, aspartic acid and phenylalanine act as excitatory neurotransmitters, just like that glutamate surge I mentioned earlier. They overstimulate neurons. But the methanol is even worse. Inside your body, methanol converts into formaldehyde, the same chemical used to preserve dead bodies. And formaldehyde is directly toxic to brain tissue, triggering the release of inflammatory cytokines. These are the chemical signals your immune system uses to fight infections, but when they're constantly activated in your brain, they create chronic neuroinflammation. Dr. David Perlmutter, a board-certified neurologist and author of Grain Brain, explains this process as glycation, where sugar molecules bond to proteins in your brain tissue. Imagine caramelizing onions. That browning effect, that's glycation. Now imagine that happening to the proteins in your neurons. This creates what are called advanced glycation end products, or AGEs. These damaged proteins can't function properly, and they accumulate in the brain, contributing to cognitive decline and dementia. But there's another villain in this story that nobody talks about. High fructose corn syrup, or HFCS. You'll find it in sweetened iced teas, fruit-flavored drinks, and even beverages marketed as natural. Here's what makes HFCS uniquely dangerous. When you eat regular sugar, it gets processed through multiple metabolic pathways. But fructose bypasses those normal checkpoints and goes straight to your liver. Your liver converts it into triglycerides, which are fat molecules. And here's the connection to your brain. High triglyceride levels are directly associated with metabolic syndrome, a cluster of conditions that includes insulin resistance, high blood pressure, and inflammation. Metabolic syndrome is one of the strongest predictors of cognitive decline. A report from the Lancet Commission on Dementia found that metabolic dysfunction is responsible for nearly 40% of preventable dementia cases worldwide. And the morning drink industry knows this. They know their products create addiction through blood sugar manipulation. They know the artificial sweeteners trigger cravings for more sweet foods throughout the day. But they also know something else. They don't have to prove their products are safe. And that brings us to the regulatory black hole that allows this to continue. In 1994, the United States Congress passed the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, known as DSHEA. This single piece of legislation fundamentally changed how drinks and supplements are regulated. Before DSHEA, if a company wanted to sell a new ingredient, they had to prove it was safe before it hit the market. After DSHEA, the burden of proof flipped. Now, the FDA has to prove a product is dangerous before they can remove it from shelves. This means companies can put artificial sweeteners, flavor enhancers, and stimulants into morning beverages and sell them to millions of people without ever conducting long-term safety studies on brain health. The term natural is completely unregulated. A drink can be called all natural, even if it contains chemically modified sweeteners, as long as those sweeteners originally came from a plant source. Stevia, for example, sounds wholesome. It comes from a leaf, but the stevia extract in your drink has been processed with solvents and chemicals until it bears almost no resemblance to the original plant. And there's virtually no long-term research on how these processed sweeteners affect neurological health over decades of daily consumption. The beverage industry has a marketing budget that dwarfs the entire budget of independent nutritional research. They fund studies. They sponsor conferences. They pay influencers to promote their products as part of a healthy lifestyle. And when independent researchers do find concerning data, the industry buries it under layers of conflicting studies they've funded themselves. This is the same playbook the tobacco industry used in the 1960s, the same strategy the sugar industry used in the 1970s when they paid scientists to blame fat instead of sugar for heart disease. And it's happening right now with your morning drink. The Cleveland Clinic's neurology department has published warnings about the connection between diet beverages and stroke risk. But those warnings never make it into mainstream health advice because the companies producing these drinks are also advertising partners of the very media outlets that would report on them. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is basic economics. The morning beverage industry is worth over $200 billion globally. Your brain health isn't part of their profit model. So how do you know if you're already affected? How do you measure the damage that's been done before it's too late to reverse it? There are specific diagnostic tools that can give you answers, and most doctors won't mention them unless you ask directly. The first is a simple fasting blood glucose test combined with a hemoglobin A1C test. Your fasting glucose tells you what your blood sugar is right now. Your A1C tells you what it's been averaging over the past 3 months. If your fasting glucose is above 95 milligrams per deciliter or your A1C is above 5.6%, you are already in the pre-diabetic range and your brain is experiencing insulin resistance even if you have no symptoms. But there's a more advanced test that almost nobody knows about, the oral glucose tolerance test with insulin tracking. This test doesn't just measure your blood sugar, it measures how much insulin your pancreas has to produce to control that sugar. If your insulin levels spike excessively high after consuming glucose, it means your cells, including your brain cells, are becoming resistant. You can have normal blood sugar levels and still be insulin resistant because your pancreas is working overtime to compensate. This is the hidden stage where brain damage is already occurring, but conventional tests won't catch it. There's also a cognitive assessment tool called the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, or MOCA test. It's a simple 10-minute screening that tests memory, attention, language, and visuospatial skills. A score below 26 out of 30 indicates mild cognitive impairment. You can request this test from your doctor, and it's covered by most insurance plans. If you score below 26 and you've been drinking sweetened beverages daily for years, there's your connection. Finally, there's an emerging biomarker called fasting insulin levels. Most doctors only check your glucose, but insulin is the early warning system. Elevated fasting insulin, anything above 8 micro-international units per milliliter, indicates that your body is struggling to manage blood sugar, and that struggle is happening in your brain too. The MRI technology exists to measure hippocampal volume, but it's expensive and usually reserved for clinical research. The blood tests I just mentioned are available at any standard lab and cost under $200 without insurance. These tests give you the data you need to take action before memory loss becomes irreversible. Now let me show you the reversal protocol, the food-first strategy that can repair the damage and protect your brain going forward. The key is a compound called vitamin K2 in its MK7 form. Most people have never heard of K2, but it's the single most important nutrient for reversing insulin resistance in the brain. K2 activates proteins that regulate where calcium goes in your body, but more importantly, it improves insulin sensitivity at the cellular level. A study published in the journal Diabetes Care found that individuals who supplemented with vitamin K2 had significantly improved glucose metabolism and reduced inflammation markers. The best food sources are fermented foods. Natto, a Japanese fermented soybean dish, contains the highest concentration of K2 on the planet. If natto is too intense for your palate, try aged cheeses like Gouda or Edam, pastured egg yolks, and grass-fed butter. These foods also contain healthy fats that stabilize blood sugar and prevent the crashes that damage your brain. For your morning routine specifically, replace that sweetened drink with a brain-protecting alternative. A homemade electrolyte drink made with water, a pinch of sea salt, fresh lemon juice, and a teaspoon of raw honey provides stable energy without the insulin spike. Or try matcha green tea, which contains L-theanine, an amino acid that promotes calm focus and protects neurons from excitotoxicity. If you need sweetness, use pure monk fruit extract, which doesn't trigger an insulin response and has been used in traditional Chinese medicine for centuries without any documented neurotoxic effects. Add foods high in omega-3 fatty acids, wild-caught sardines, mackerel, and anchovies. These fish are rich in DHA, the primary structural fat in your brain. DHA reduces inflammation and supports the repair of damaged neurons. Leafy greens like spinach, kale, and Swiss chard provide folate and magnesium, both essential for neurotransmitter production and glucose metabolism. The rule is simple. If it comes in a bottle, can, or box and has a list of ingredients you can't pronounce, it doesn't belong in your body first thing in the morning. Your brain deserves whole foods, not chemical experiments. Your body is an ecosystem, not a laboratory. For decades, we've been sold the lie that we can outsmart nature with artificial sweeteners, zero-calorie formulas, and engineered beverages that promise energy without consequences. But your brain doesn't run on marketing slogans. It runs on biological truth. And the truth is this: every morning you choose that drink, you're choosing short-term convenience over long-term cognitive survival. The damage is real, the science is clear, and the solution is simpler than the industry wants you to believe. Eat food. Drink water. Protect your brain like your future depends on it, because it does. If this information made you rethink your morning routine, share this video with someone you love. Subscribe for more evidence-based health content that the mainstream media won't cover. And remember, your memory is your identity. Don't let a beverage company take it away from you, one sip at a time.